Okay, let's get started. So thank you everyone for joining. My name is Patricia Walsh. I'm the Public Art and Civic Design and Senior Program Manager at an organization called Americans for the Arts. I want to start off by thanking the Newburgh Free Library for having me present for you guys today. I'm really excited to talk about our conversation around sort of the value, the economic and otherwise of public art, and the role of artists in communities and society and why supporting them is important. So I'm excited to have that conversation. More than happy to have have an open dialogue, of course. I'll start off with a bit of an introduction about myself and the organization, then we'll dive a little bit deeper into the agenda for the day and wrap up with some time for Q&A. So a little bit about Americans for the Arts. Americans for the Arts is a national nonprofit arts organization. We support those who are essentially making the arts happen in their communities. It's probably the easiest way to describe us. Kind of a weird, kind of large conglomerate, but we're a fun group that are really trying to help those who are trying to make their arts ecosystems happen. Our main audiences are typically local arts agencies or county arts agencies. So folks that really are out there supporting artists and really helping local arts ecosystems happen. And we do that through a couple different ways. We do that through a lot of research. Most of us know us for arts and economic impact studies that we do, which I'll touch on briefly through this conversation. We do a lot of work around advocacy, particularly at the federal level, though we do also do some work on the state and sometimes at the local level as well. And then we also do a lot of field education also, which is predominantly the work that I do within the organization. I work on 5 major topic areas, public art being one of them. The other is the intersection of arts and civic design, so looking at where arts intersect with planning, land use development, and transportation opportunities. I also look at cultural districts and tourism, arts and community development, which is a very big, hearty word, as well as creative placemaking. And today I'm here to talk to you about the public art component of the work that I do and as it relates to artists as well. A little bit about myself. I worked in the field of public art for several years. I got my undergrad at SUNY Plattsburgh at the State University of New York in Plattsburgh. I actually grew up in Dutchess County and lived there most of my life. Well, we lived there most of my growing up years, I should say. Went to school at SUNY Plattsburgh, left for a little bit to live in New Mexico for a little while, and then was in Boston where I got my master's degree in arts administration. There I studied public art, worked at one of the local museums, and then built my career in the public art field out in California with the San Jose Public Art Program and a few other the local programs out there, doing a lot of work around collection management and community engagement work that I did. So managing the collection and managing how to care for artworks that are owned by a city. I've sort of bounced around a little bit after that and then landed in my current position here in Maryland, not here in Maryland, in Maryland, in Washington, D.C. with Americans for the Arts, where I've been for about 7 years now, coming up this March, where I do the work that I mentioned, doing a lot of field education and really talking to folks like yourselves about the value that the arts bring to communities. In addition to that, also providing field education, professional development opportunities, convening and networking opportunities for people in local arts agencies and public art programs across the country. I've recently relocated back to the Dutchess County area to spend more time with my parents, and since we're also working remotely. So I'm very excited to be back in the Hudson Valley area and also talking with some neighbors down in Newburgh, so very excited. So that's a bit of an introduction. A little bit about what I'm going to be doing today is we'll have the introduction. I'll talk a bit more about the value of public art in communities. I'm going to talk about, just for contextual, and I think we'll answer a lot of questions also about the 2020 impacts of arts and culture on impacts on the arts and culture sector. So what have been the sort of the larger issues that have been going on this year and how it's been sort of impacting the arts and culture sector for context. And then we'll dive into the role of artists and communities. And a lot of this will kind of overlap throughout the presentation and then hopefully accumulate in some time with some Q&A at the end. So we're already driving right through the agenda. So we've already done the introduction. So let's just dive right into the content for today. So I'm going to start off talking about the value of public art in communities. Much of what I'm going to talk about really comes out of a document that we created back in 2018 called Why Public Art Matters. It is free to download if you go to americansforthearts.org/whypublicartmatters2018. It's a free PDF that you can download. It's a really kind of colorful, fun document that really kind of highlights 5 different areas that we'll talk about today on how public arts are important to communities. One, which is I know we're really excited to talk about, is economic growth and sustainability. The other is attachment and cultural identity, then artists as contributors, social cohesion and social cohesion and understanding, and public health. Excuse me. So moving on and just diving right into the information, we'll talk about the economic growth and sustainability and where public art fits into that. There's a lot of text on the screen and I'll read some of it, but essentially what it talks about is that people really love to go to interesting places. They love to live in interesting places. When they go someplace, when they live somewhere, they want to see themselves reflected into a community. They want to see, histories being understood visually. They want to see how a community identifies itself, and public art really does a lot of that work for it. And so in that rate, it sort of intersects a lot with supporting cultural tourism and economic development strategies within communities. A couple of points, so data points here that we've dug up throughout the years that are supported by, outside organizations is one through the American Planning Association, who say that arts, culture, and creativity can improve a community's competitive edge, attract new and visiting populations, integrate the visions of both the community and business leaders. And we found that was supported in 2016 when we did a public opinion poll, and found out that half of people with college degrees, the majority of millennials and Gen Xers, say they would strongly consider whether a community is rich in the arts when deciding where to locate for a job. So again, about attracting new talent, attracting people that want to come to and want to stay in a community is really important for the growth and sustainability of a community. One example of how public art has been integrated into a financially sustaining area is this really sort of fantastic tour, if you will, that happens in Sauk County, Wisconsin. What they did was a group of really fantastic innovators looked around and saw that one of the assets that people had in their community was access to land. There's lots of farms up there. People have land that, they use it for half of the year, then it goes a little bit, fallow for a bit before they go back to it. And so they have this lots of land, and what can they do with it? At the same time, they were trying to encourage people to come and visit the different communities that kind of went through this one particular route that went through the entire county. And so what they did was they worked with the different farmers and connected them with different artists who then went and presented their work. One of the pieces here is shown by Carl Nunch. And what they did then was they created a tour. They worked with these artists to put the work on the land of the farmers, and then they highlighted this tour and this basically this arts trail that they created, and it happens I believe every year or every other year. I forget what their timing is at this point, but it's really helped draw a lot of people to the area and helped with increased revenue to many local businesses. Some of the statistics already say here. It's an estimated 4,200 visitors, or over 65% of whom traveled over 50 miles to see the installations. And I want to point that out because that's really important. The farther people come into a place to visit, the more likely to spend more money. So they're going to have to stay at a hotel. They'll probably have to buy something to eat. They may have to, pay a babysitter for the day. So there's a lot of sort of economic benefits to having, these types of events, if you will, or bringing in a draw from people from outside your area as well. And then more specifically, it helped increase many of the local businesses, some so as much as a 300% increase in their revenue due to just this one event. So again, there's a relationship between how people really want to go visit areas or even live in areas that are really exciting and show a lot of creativity, show a lot of culture, and public art is one of those methods in doing that. Moving on, one of the other areas that we see that public art has as a value to communities is attachment and cultural identity. Public art directly influences how people see and connect with a place, again, providing access to aesthetics that support its identity and making residents feel appreciated and valued. If people see themselves in a particular community, if they see themselves reflected in the artwork or in the landscape in some way, they feel like they belong and they feel like they can feel attachment there. And it also help people understand that arts improve the image and identity of their community. And so a couple of data points that we found was a Soul of the Community report in 2010 that Knight Foundation did. They studied about 20 different characteristics of what made people want to stay in a community. They were really trying to understand what that means. They looked at 23 different communities across the country. And out of those 20, in the top 3 was aesthetics. So people were really wanted to see, themselves visually. They not only wanted to be in a place that was visually interesting, but also see themselves as part of that work. And then about 70% of Americans, again, as part of a public opinion poll we did in 2018, 70% of Americans believe that the arts improve the image and identity of their community. So again, public art can really help build that identity, that image, that ability for people to kind of see themselves in a place and feel like they want to attach themselves to and be a part of that area, either as a visitor or as a resident or citizen of the area. So one example of that and the way public art has helped one community sort of create that sort of attachment, sort of like cultural identity, was being able to kind of address this ongoing issue that was happening between this community and where our school system was down in Austin, Texas. Not Austin, excuse me, San Antonio, Texas. What they realized was that there was a lot of students that were trying to get from their community over to where the school was. And the one place that they really had to kind of walk through was this really kind of scary underpass or overpass, excuse me, which are just kind of creepy as they are because they're not designed for humans. They're designed for cars to drive over them. And so they brought in an artist who was then able to really kind of create this beautiful installation that not only illuminated and allowed kids to go during times like this where the sun is setting a lot earlier and feel more comfortable going through. In addition to that, it also helped unify the two communities. They saw an opportunity that really kind of allowed them to kind of come together as opposed to not just having one people live on one side and one people live on the other who had access to the school, but allowed everyone to sort of feel this sense of identity and sort of attachment to this place that was really quite beautiful. It reflected, the imagery that they used was reflective of the communities, and it really helped strengthen the identity of each community. So that's sort of a powerful kind of example of how the arts can not only help resolve a social issue, but also provide an opportunity for people to come together and really feel a sense of pride and attachment to where they are. And then artists as contributors. Artists are contributors and they want opportunities to contribute to their communities. Many of them do. By providing a public art ecosystem, you really support artists and other creatives by validating them as important contributors to communities. So public art programs or public art opportunities in a community really allow you to pay for an artist, gives them the opportunity to really provide their skills and talents to the community in order to showcase a lot of the things we already talked about, in order to showcase the values, the culture, the thoughts and the desires and ideas that people have in a community, but allowing artists to be part of that conversation. So it really allows their skill set to be utilized. Some other sort of interesting data points, artists are highly entrepreneurial. They are 3.5 times more likely than the total US workforce to be self-employed, which is really fantastic because the smaller the business, there's a lot of opportunity for collaboration there. And that's a really exciting opportunity. And artists are creative problem solvers and can provide unique, innovative, and beautiful solutions to design challenges. So something else the Knight Foundation through another one of their reports outlined. Again, artists want to give back, and one of the things that they're really fantastic with, not only do they have a lot of technical skills, but they're really creative and they come at things from different perspectives than what maybe typically happens. I've also noticed in certain situations that bringing artists into a conversation, say around topics around housing or even transportation, just by having an artist in the room kind of encourages other people to think creatively. So again, allows that sort of ability for that to happen, not only for the artist to provide that skill of thinking creatively, but also allows others to do so as well. And then my favorite statistic, which I kind of made up, if you will, was 100% of public art is made by artists and other creatives. I haven't found a public artwork in my over 15 years of experience in this field that wasn't made by either an artist and other creatives. So I'm going with that statistic. So again, if you want artists to be able to contribute and see them as contributors and highlight and value them, providing an opportunity to do public art is one of those ways. And this is an example of that. This is in Indianapolis. This is LaShonda Crowstorm. She was an artist who was invited to be part of a master plan process to really rethink how one of the park systems was going to be done. And so she provided valuable contributions that were included in the planning of public spaces and amenities. So working with planners, engineers, designers, elected officials, and other community stakeholders. Artists bring their creative skills and interpretations, as we kind of talked about. These conversations generate creativity in others, inspiring innovative results. So again, things we just talked about, having an artist, and this was one example where that was really successful in creating a really amazing program or project where an artist highlighted and was able to support the work that was already happening, but provide different aspects to that and be able to build a better community relations as well. And then social cohesion and understanding. Public art provides a visual mechanism for understanding other cultures and perspectives, reinforcing social connectivity with others. I'm going to read through the statistics and then I'll go back and sort of kind of unpack this a little bit. 72% of Americans believe that the arts unify our communities, regardless of age, race, and ethnicity. 69% of the population believe the arts lift me up beyond everyday experiences. And 73% of Americans agree that the arts help me understand other cultures better. So again, this goes back to some of the stuff we were talking about, you know, when you're bringing public art in and you're allowing artists and communities to be involved in the development of public art to reflect their culture, reflect their ideas. There's a conversations that happen there. Seeing somebody reflected requires, you know, ability to see that they're either understanding another culture or the perspective differently, or seeing themselves within that conversation. And so it helps kind of build those levels of understanding. And we'll talk a little bit more about this when we talk about the 2020 impacts on arts and culture as well. And this is one example of how an artist did that. In a rapidly gentrifying neighborhood in Seattle, an artist came in and worked with the local African-American community who was seeing their community really being gentrified, and worked with the artist to really create sort of this landmark gateway keeper, if you will, or gateway area, to really identify and acknowledge that the area is an African-American community, to be able to identify that not only for now, but also for the future, for people to know that that's why that artwork is there, even though there's a possibility some folks may no longer be there moving forward, but they really wanted something that really sort of acknowledged that level of history within an area, excuse me. Yeah, and again, just something to kind of point out about this particular project, it was done at the request of the community members. This wasn't a city-driven conversation. The community members really wanted something like this to happen, and the city of Seattle worked with them to make it happen. And then talk about public health. I'll talk about it very broadly in this context, and we'll talk about it a little more when we talk about 2020, because the COVID-19 pandemic, I think, kind of upended a lot of things and had us talk about things in a different way. So public art addresses public health and personal illness by reducing stress, providing a sense of belonging, and addressing stigmas towards those with mental health issues. There's been very few studies on the role of public art in health, but there have been a few that have happened. We know overall arts and culture are very help people with any sort of health issue to really kind of think creatively, kind of brings them outside of their, you know, their illness and really become more engaged. Not necessarily engaged, but really kind of think, just kind of distracts them a little bit from what they're going through, and kind of uplifts their spirits. So public art is noted as slowing pedestrians down to enjoy their spaces and providing a positive impact on mood. So something that was studied in 2018. And also art located in hospitals offer major opportunities and deliver of better health and improved experiences for patients, service users, and staff alike. So something that was noticed with the Journal of Royal Society of Medicine. So again, it's not, you know, public art in healthcare facilities can look like something that's a sculpture, it can look like a painting, it can look like a lot of different things that happen within those facilities themselves. And people just really enjoy seeing not just the white walls, but really being able to see creativity, images that are really kind of soothing and interesting to them throughout their day. And that's not just for the patients, as we said, but also for anybody visiting, for the staff, doctors, etc. And this is just one example out in San Francisco. The San Francisco hospitals have a plethora of exterior and interior works of public art. And they provide several benefits, creating healthy environments and connecting with the community. So this piece was, they were building a brand new hospital, and I believe it was downtown or near downtown San Francisco. And what this work did was really kind of provided a landmark opportunity for the community to come in, to not be as sort of like like hospitals are kind of scary, if we're being completely honest. They can be a little bit scary and intimidating. And I think having one in your community, if someone showed up like next to your house, would be a little bit, jarring. And so having an artwork like this that's really sort of interesting, that really kind of sits and also helps a little bit with the traffic that kind of goes around the circle there, really kind of, I think, helps kind of bridge that gap between, having this weird, this health, building and, the rest of the community that was living in the area. And so it allows that level of conversation. And again, it's also something that if you're working there, if you're visiting, or if you're a patient there, it's something beautiful to look at and experience as you're going in and out for your day. So we've moved through our first two items on the agenda. So next we're just going to hop right into the 2020 impacts on arts and culture. And so we'll dive into some of the bigger issues that are impacting the world today. And we'll start here, kind of talking more about the current pandemic that we're in with COVID-19 and the way we've seen public art sort of be a part of this conversation so far. I'm sure things will change as we continue to go through this as a country and as a planet together. One way that public art was brought into the conversation, which I appreciate, is this use of masks. So excuse me, you'll see a piece here by Picasso, which is one of the pieces in Chicago, that they actually went and put masks on them to encourage people to use masks in order to protect themselves against COVID. In Nevada, they didn't quite go so far as going to the sculptures, but they photoshopped masks on all their, in Carson City, they photoshopped all their masks on all their public artworks to encourage people again to wear masks. So it's how do you use the asset of a public artwork to be able to provide a public health safety messaging out to your community. And then these bottom two, you'll see, these are artists that are doing work that are really sort of responding to the end of time moment, right? Like, how are we honoring, the frontline workers, the nurses, the doctors, the people that are really sort of in it, and really helping people to build themselves up. So artists are being part of that conversation and being part of public art. And there's the other side, right? I mean, remember, and I know there's some places in the country that are still struggling with this, when we had to like really, wake up super early to go get toilet paper, something we never thought we'd run out of. And so what did that feel like, going out into the world just to collect, something so basic that we all really needed, but also being really, kind of fearful, if you will, of what was going on, this this invisible kind of predator that was out there, COVID-19, and how that would affect us. And then lastly, let's talk about the Atlanta Public Art Tour app. This is something that we saw a lot of cities start to pop up with. We knew that people, cities know that people need to get out of the house at some point. Like, we can't all just hide in our homes. I know that'd be great for a lot of social distancing, but people do need to leave at some point. And so you saw a lot of these apps that popped up, and essentially what they were is that cities really kind of identified public art around their communities, not just cities, that we saw this in smaller towns as well. Where they identified them and then encouraged people to go out and do tours of those artworks. And so they were given information, a little bit of history on the artwork, the title, the artist, a little bit of information for people to just be able to go out and to see them. They could drive around and look at them. They could social distance by doing some really walking out in the door, out and outdoors. So that was another way that public art really kind of was influenced by the way COVID-19 really came in strong in the beginning of this year. And then we'll talk a bit about the economic impact. This has been, so some of the work that America's Free Arts does, as I mentioned earlier, is we do an arts and economic impact study. So we have, and most of our work that we focus on has to do with the nonprofit arts and cultural organizations. And so we do a lot of bit of studying with them. And once we realized that there was going to be a really fantastic economic struggle that the country was going to with the shutdown of many communities, we decided to make sure we were starting to measure what that looked like, particularly for nonprofit arts and culture, excuse me. And so weekly we set out these, we do a survey that's completely open to anybody who's a nonprofit to apply to. And then every week we sort of update our numbers and make sure that we're staying on top of what's going on. So as of our last report, which is November 9th, the national financial losses to nonprofit arts and cultural organizations is 14.1 billion with a B. That's an estimated, and that's based on 19,800 surveys that people that responded from nonprofit arts organizations. And that went up about $4 billion It was originally around 10 billion when I looked at it last in August. So it's gone up about 4 billion over the past 3-4 months. And we know that 99% of organizations have canceled events, a loss of $478 million in admissions, and 15.1 billion audience spending at local businesses. So again, this is about when people don't go to events or they're not leaving the house, they're not spending money in local areas. They're not going to restaurants. They're not staying at a hotel. Excuse me. They're not, going to retail, not paying their parking, paying their babysitters. So all that money was lost that people weren't spending or weren't able to spend because there wasn't events for them to go to. And then, and that's not just local businesses, but then there's a loss in government revenue, right? Because businesses get taxed. If you go to spend money at retail, you're going to get a tax, and so that goes into your local, goes into government retail as well. And so the total economic impact of organizational and audience spending losses is about 4.9 billion in lost government revenue and about 847,000 jobs that are no longer being supported through this work. So there's been a very big impact, of what's happened since March of this year. Excuse me. And this isn't just on nonprofits. We've also been studying artists and other creatives. And so we have an open, ongoing survey that we do the same thing with every week. We update the report that are based on the 26,800 survey respondents. Of the artists and creatives who have responded, 95% report loss of income. Overall, they expect to lose an average of $22,000 each in creativity-based income, so an estimated of 50.6 billion nationally. 63% have become fully unemployed. 67% are unable to access the supplies, resources, spaces, or people necessary for their work. 47%, and some of the scarier ones are 78% have no post-pandemic financial recovery plan. So once we get to the other side of this, how are they going to rebuild their livelihoods? And right now, a lot of artists and other creatives don't quite know the answer to that. And then we also are diving into understanding, Black, Indigenous, and other artists of color and the impact to them, because it's right, like everything we talked about with COVID over, the national conversations, that Black, Indigenous, and people of color are really impacted more profoundly than their white counterparts. And that's happening in the arts world as well. So they have a higher rates of unemployment than white artists due to the pandemic. They also have a larger percentage of their income, about 61% versus 56%. And I know those percentages look a little bit small, but that equals to a lot of money when you're looking at, there's $22,000 or $50 billion nationally. It really can add up. I do want to say though, I don't want it to end completely on a gloom and doom. This is one other thing that we studied around artists and creatives, that 76%, that regardless of everything they've been through, losing their jobs and everything, 76% of our artists use their art to raise morale and create community cohesion. So even though they may not have access to the resources or the finances to be able to do their work normally, they're still doing work. They're still giving of themselves to make sure that their communities feel cohesion, that they feel, empowered, that people feel okay being outside and being able to, connect with others. So that's part of this conversation as well. And I want to make sure that we're talking about artists and their role in society. This is part of it, that they really feel like that's something they can give back to their communities, particularly even in times like now where they're suffering just as much as everybody else across the country. And then we can't really talk about 2020 without talking about the more recent uptick of the Black Lives Matter movement, particularly with the death of George Floyd at the hands of the Minneapolis Police Department, and seeing really where public art and artists kind of sit in this conversation. So spontaneously, this beautiful mural that I really think everyone's seen at this point of George Floyd himself happened within a week or two of his death. So that's one way, again, of artists really kind of highlighting the grief and the thoughts and ideas that are happening in a community. So that's one example of that, of how an artist created a mural. The Black Lives Matter plaza that happened in Washington, D.C. and is now similar type murals have happened across, I think over 50 cities, 50 communities now. There may be a bit more, I've lost track a little bit after the summer, that have happened across the country as another way for artists to give back and to be able to be part of the conversation around racial justice and social equity. And then of course, in response, then public art itself, and the way people are responding to images and representation of, our white supremacist systems and things that are really inequitable. So the vandalism, if you will, against monuments, memorials across the country, particularly those that that really kind of represent or represent to some communities somebody or individual or idea that really is oppressive to another component of the community. So we have the General E. Lee Memorial there from Richmond, Virginia, and just sort of the messages that are really kind of lit on the pedestal, I think speaks volumes about how people feel about this item, particularly those who live in the community. And I think that's something really powerful. And another way for communities to really engage with a conversation is by putting their thoughts and ideas on the thing themselves that they're seeing as a representation of the problems that they're seeing in their community. So again, about racial justice, about equity, about representation in public spaces. And this other one, I believe this is, I always forget this guy. I believe this is Columbus. I believe this is him in Boston, being thrown with blood and with paint. Excuse me, it's not blood, but representing of the blood of the native population that was decimated due to his action. So, and again with the Black Lives Matter markings on it. So there's a lot of conversations that public artworks get in the middle, become a part of. But not only the negative parts of it and sort of having, building part of those dialogues, but also the sense of healing that we're seeing with the George Floyd Memorial, as well as the Black Lives Matter work. So there's sort of a balance there in the way arts and artists kind of sit in the conversation. And just a few kind of promos of some things that AFTA's done within those 3 different spaces. We are doing an Arts Create Hope campaign. It's a social media campaign that really sort of highlights how the arts are really helping us through these times of grief. So if you're interested in that, it's a whole social media campaign. We have Americans for the Arts has a sister organization called the Arts Action Fund, which does a lot of work around voting, or we do a lot of work around advocacy work. It's a 501c4, so they're allowed to do advocacy work. So I recommend checking them out. They really were instrumental in really trying to making sure people knew how to vote. They were part of that conversation. And the last one, which I see you can't really tell if your screen is small. And earlier this year, we launched the cultural equity in public art, in the public art field, excuse me. It's a foundation document that really kind of outlines cultural equity and inequities in the public art field. And really started to start that conversation as we as an organization continue down that road to help the field itself and our local arts agencies and all of our members, get through this process and build more equitable systems moving forward. And so that brings us to kind of the last section of our agenda, or second to last, excuse me, which is talking about artists and communities. And so again, a lot of this, I'm just going to repeat stuff that we talked about earlier. About the way they're important. They're highly entrepreneurial, so they're bringing, that kind of monies into their communities. They, can hire people. They'll collaborate with different people. They're creative problem solvers, bringing their skills and talents into a community. A lot of the public art all the public art that's made is made by artists. So again, bringing their crafts, their skills, their knowledge, their talents into a community really helps build that kind of relationship. Builds, a more vibrant community, if you will, by allowing artists to be part and be present of the work that's happening in a community. And again, even during this time of COVID, 76% of creatives acknowledge that they're using their art to raise morale and create community cohesion. So again, they're still out there doing this work regardless of, the financial hits and the traumas that they're dealing with themselves. I'm going to sort of outline this kind of fun example. We talked a little doom and gloom about 2020, but I wanted to bring out something that was a little more fun. But sort of again highlights the way artists can give back to communities, and also highlights their skills and their abilities to do work. This was a temporary piece that was done as part of a festival in Pittsburgh in I believe 2015. It was called the Lost and Found Factory. And so what attendees to the festival did was they came up and they talked with an artist and they sort of drew a little picture of what they've lost. So things they might have lost in the past, but they remembered the object and they remembered how it made them feel. And so what these artists did was then try to recreate that object for them So using their crafts and their skills to be able to bring back sort of these memories, or this object that can help bring back a memory or remind people of how they felt during some, during an event or something. We're really helping sort of find those memories for them. And so, here's an example of a happy, I don't know if it's a mother and daughter, but they created a little toy, looks like a toy bear, that they had lost at some point, but are really happy now to have it recreated for them. So again, this is sort of highlighting how artists really connect with communities, are very skilled in a lot of, a lot of tactical ways and being able to create things, be able to think together, the way they can collaborate with other people. They're very much a part of communities. They aren't, set aside from them. And artists really are part of, just trying to really create vibrant communities and healthy communities, and really want to be part of that conversation. And they are, through their skills, through their abilities to be creative, through their abilities to be collaborative, through their abilities to be, their skills, their tactical skills that they have, and being, financially, they're part of communities in such a way as to be business owners, and to think of themselves as small businesses. So all these are different ways in which artists really kind of bring back to communities and are really a vital part of creating a more healthy and unique area for people to live, work, and play. And though it wasn't asked, but I'm going to put this in anyway. As you're talking about, the role of artists playing in communities, I think it's important to also talk about ways to support artists in a community. So I'll talk through these. There's a lot of other different ways that I'm sure aren't here, but I just wanted to kind of bring up a few. One is grants or loans for artists and being inclusive of artists. And so there's sort of two parts to that sentence. There's grants for artists. So for example, an arts commission can, put together a grant where they want artists to apply to maybe create a mural or something on the side of a building. So that's one way. Another way to make sure artists are inclusive or included or inclusive of artists is thinking about, maybe there's a financial institution that wants to do loans to small businesses, but making sure artists and other creators are actually named in the policies, in which artists that would also encourage artists to apply or allows them to apply, or make sure they're part of that, and making sure that when you're creating these types of programs, you're actually inviting artists to be part of them and making sure they're aware of them and inviting them to apply. I think opportunities for training and professional development go a long way. Free programs like this. So very glad the Newburgh Free Library pulled this together. I'm honored to be a part of it, of course. So things like this to allow artists to really kind of not only gain more skills, but also evolve professionally. So to learn from other people what's going on, or how other people are addressing situations, or maybe different materials or different ways of thinking about doing art in communities, or art itself. And then actively inviting artists to the community development conversation to problem solve on local issues. So if you have maybe a transportation issue, or if there's larger policy conversations that you're having in your community, invite artists to be a part of that conversation. They really can surprise you with how creative they can be. And again, not just being creative themselves, but allowing other people that are at the table to be creative, in addressing a solution. And of course, one of the more obvious ways sometimes is also places to showcase artists' work. So galleries, performance spaces, performing artists, musicians, visual artists, they all have very different needs, but they do need the spaces in order to kind of spread their wings to not only practice their craft, but also showcases. This can be galleries, excuse me, music venues, performing arts venues, things like that. So allowing those types of places to happen, or even being, allowing permits in public spaces, things like that, where artists can apply and do something publicly for other people to enjoy. And similar ways for places to showcase artists are also developing programs that support artists. So public art, we talked a lot about that. Artists in residencies is sort of a big thing that a lot of, we've seen a lot of municipalities do across the country, and also a lot of nonprofits and others do them as well, where they invite an artist in and they usually, pay them a stipend to engage with their community or to engage with their organization for a set period of time, and then an artist creates something, usually an artwork of some kind, or engages them sort of art process with the people, with the community that residency, that organization or that municipality is a part of, to be able to either address an issue or just express an issue or something. So those are some opportunities. And then I would have to also say that if you want it's great to support current artists, but you have to support future artists as well. Arts education is essential. Arts education it helps transform the learning environments. They reach students in ways that are not otherwise being reached. The arts connect students to themselves and each other, and the arts provide new challenges for those students already considered successful. Really, if we can talk about what's happening today and ways to support artists of today, but we need artists of tomorrow too. We need those creativity. We need future thinkers. We need people that are able to kind of think creatively, that can work together, that can challenge themselves, and can challenge others to really kind of address, everything that we're all going through as a country, and as a community as well as just to bring beauty in and of itself to our lives. I think is something that's really important for artists, that artists do for us also. So that's sort of the end of the agenda. Oh, I had one thing I did want to kind of plug in here. I've been talking a lot about the role of artists in community. A lot of this conversation, I just wanted to give a plug for this program that Americans for the Arts developed and launched last year. It's Artists at the Community Development Table. There's an online guide where you can download, and it's designed not only for artists, but it's also designed for people that are interested in engaging artists, at the intersection of community work. So if they want to bring an artist into a project or something like that. So I recommend looking that up. It not only has a guide for it, but there's also some online learning that you can do as well. There's about 4 workshops that are about an hour long that dive into the topics as well.